Hi, scholars. Are you ready for the next lesson for this week in our social studies unit? Of course, we're learning about our new government that's being made after the American Revolution. In Chapter 3, we talked about the Articles of Confederation, how the leaders of our country came together and they decided, hey, this is what we want our government to look like, and they made this central government, but it was a weak central government and it had a lot of problems. So in this chapter today, we're going to read about two individuals who are very important to American history, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. Yes, the same Alexander Hamilton that, the whole musical, Hamilton the musical. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but anyway, whatever. So we're going to learn about these guys, and if you look on page 28 of your reader, because I want you to follow along as I'm reading, okay? The big question for this chapter, and this will also be on your worksheet at the end too, the big question is, why did James Madison and Alexander Hamilton think a stronger central government was needed? Now remember, they created the leaders, they made the Articles of Confederation, and they had a central government, sort of, but it was really weak and it couldn't do anything. And these two guys thought, you know what, we need a stronger central government. And we want to know why they thought that, okay? So let's start reading on page 28. And the chapter is entitled Planning a New Constitution, of course. And the first section that we're going to read is called New Ordinance. And an ordinance, if you look at the vocab word on that page, is a law or government law or government rule. So like we all have ordinances we have to follow. In the city, you have noise ordinances. Those are noise laws, meaning like you can't have loud parties after a certain time at night, or the police come, knock on your door and say, hey, too loud, okay? Or, yeah, maybe your mom and dad have some ordinances. They don't call them ordinances, of course, like you need to go to bed by a certain time. Those are laws or government rules, okay? So, Northwest Ordinance. So we have a law, something that's a law, and it's Northwest. So I'm assuming it has something to do with probably the northwestern part of the United States, maybe. Anyway, the Northwest, according to this time. So let's go back to read. About the last thing you'd expect is that such a weak Congress would pass one of the most important laws in all of American history. But that's just what they did in 1787. So remember, they've got the weak laws, but the central government has decided, let's do this. Let's pass this law. This 1787 law is known as the Northwest Ordinance. At this time, the United States owned a huge triangle of land in the Northwest. Remember, after they won the French and Indian War when we were still British colonies, we had all that land that we won from France, and England said, no, you can't go over there because we don't want you to mess with the Native Americans and whatever. Well, now that we have our freedom from England, we have that land. And there's no king to tell us we can't go over the mountains and go live in this land. So we have this huge triangle of land, and it was bordered by the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, and the Great Lakes. We learned about those when we talked about the geography of the United States. Mississippi River runs down the middle of the United States. The Ohio River runs underneath Ohio, and then the Great Lakes are up top. So it made this little border area with water, okay? So we have the Great Lakes, we have the Ohio River, and we have the Mississippi River. And right after the United States became independent, settlers began to pour into that territory because there was no longer any king to say, you can't go over the mountain, and no British troops to stop people. So in those days, the usual thing for a country to do was to turn such an area into colonies for its own benefit. And that's what Great Britain did. Remember, they got all this land here in the United States. They made us their colonies, and that's what they continue to do. In fact, it's what France and Spain did too. And it's what the Netherlands and Portugal and other European countries would do. So when other countries would get new land, they would make it their colonies. And they weren't states, or they didn't have any say necessarily in the government per se. But they, were their colonies, and they had to do like we did to Britain. So if you look on page 29, I'm going to hold it up for you right here. There's a map on page 29, and if you can see, the Northwest Territories are what's colored in yellow here. And the Mississippi River runs right here. The Ohio River runs right here. And these are the Great Lakes. So this is what's bordering the Northwest colony. And I'm trying to do this backwards. And, here are the 13 colonies. So you have the 13 colonies right here, and then this Northwest Territory. And if you look over here on this map right here, it actually shows you this Northwest Territory, what 5 states actually become the Northwest Territory eventually, okay? So right now, if you were to go into the Northwest Territory, you would be going into the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. So those are the 5 states that make up the Northwest Territory, which we now had, right? So let's go back to reading on page 30, okay? I might refer to this map a little later on, so I'm going to set it off to the side here. So, page 30. It's not what the United States did, though. They didn't decide to make colonies. First, Congress guaranteed everyone who settled in the vast territory the same rights that the people in the 13 states had, such as trial by jury, freedom of religion, okay? So they guaranteed, you leave our states, that's fine. Go live in this territory over here. You're still going to have the same rights. You're not just some colony who doesn't have the same rights. Then Congress divided the territory into smaller territories because it was pretty big. And then when a certain number of settlers in that territory started to live in that territory could then try and become a state, which was unheard of at the time, okay? So not a colony of a mother country, mind you, but a full-fledged state equal to all other states. So this is what helped us eventually get all of our 50 states, right? So we have these territories. People can move into them. Let's say the government says, when 1,000 people live in this territory, you guys can now start to be, go through the process of becoming a state, a full-fledged state, and have rights for voting in Congress and all this other stuff. And from that time on, that was the plan used to create nearly all of the other states today in the United States that we have, even including the state of Arizona. All right, so there was, back on page 30, there was one more very important part of the Northwest Ordinance. Earlier read that 5 northern states had taken steps to end slavery. So when we read in the Articles of Confederation, 5 of the states had said, we're not going to have slavery, and the others were varying degrees of it, right? Okay, well, the central government decided that with this Northwest Ordinance, people in other states too were coming to believe that slavery is wrong, especially as the Declaration of Independence said that all men are created equal. And some of these people were slaveholders themselves. So Congress could not do anything about slavery in the states where it already existed. So in the states like the southern states where slavery was already existing and it wasn't part or against the law in their state constitutions, Congress couldn't do anything about it. But Congress did want to make clear how it felt about slavery. Therefore, the Northwest Ordinance said, let's flip this over to page 30. What did it say? I don't know. It prohibited slavery. That's anywhere in the Northwest Territory. That was an important thing to say at the time to advance liberty and equality for everyone. It would become even more important later. So if you think about it, people move into this new territory. They start to, live there, and they're following all these laws, and they want to become a state. Well, in order to become a state, they couldn't have slavery. So they had to, it couldn't happen in those states. Now, if you think about it, that's kind of a good thing, because the more states we add, the less we could have, with slave states, right? It's a good thing. Yay. All right. So I'm going to go back to page 30 real quick, because we're going to read this little caption about this gentleman right here. So, Arthur St. Clair, he's a leader during the Revolution, and he's appointed the first governor of the Northwest Territory. So, again, remember, all the states had a governor. So, the Northwest Territory, he was the very first governor of the Northwest states. Okay? Anyway, going on to page 31. This is the need for power. So passing one law, however, even a law as important as the Northwest Ordinances, didn't change the fact that the Articles of Confederation were not working very well. So these articles that built or created this central federal government wasn't working really well. A growing number of people began to feel that Congress needed more power, more authority to be effective. And they did. They were kind of useless. Many, though, wanted to keep the Articles of Confederation. They thought that an amendment here or there would do the trick. They thought, well, let's tweak it here. If we add this or we add that, it'll fix things. Not James Madison. Nope. Madison was from a well-to-do Virginia family. He had spent most of his life studying government and politics. And the vocab word for politics, in case you ever wanted to know what that means, it's the activities of leaders running a government. So when we talk about politics, we're talking about the activities of all those people who run our government. People said that Madison knew everything there was to know about governing. When he was still in his 20s, he helped write the new Virginia Constitution. So he was one of the guys who wrote the state constitution for Virginia. And remember, the state constitutions were much better than the Articles of Confederation, which was the Constitution at the time for the federal government. Now, in his mid-30s, Madison served as one of Virginia's delegates to Congress. There he witnessed firsthand the problems of the struggling young nation. After a few years, Madison decided that no amount of fixing could make the Articles of Confederation work well. There was only one thing to do: scrap the entire articles and start over. He wanted to just toss them out. He's like, this is not going to work. We can try and fix this and fix that and fix that, and it's not going to do anything. Kind of like if you got a really run down car, right? And you're doing everything. You're having to change the oil, you change the motor, and the tires go out and the brakes go out and the engine busts, and you got to replace this and replace that and replace this. At some point, it's going to cost you more to fix the old thing than just to scrap the old thing and buy a new car. Just saying. Okay, so that's kind of what James Madison was saying with this Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. He was saying, this is ridiculous. It's just not working. Okay, so we're going to go on to page 32. So Alexander Hamilton reached the same conclusion. This is a different guy. Hamilton's childhood had been far different from Madison's. He had grown up in the West Indies. West Indies, remember, they were those islands that are in the Gulf of Mexico, you know. Okay, kind of like where Cuba is and all those little islands down there. So Hamilton's father was a British merchant who lived very comfortably, but who took no responsibility for his son. Hamilton's mother died when he was only 11. So several years later, Alexander was working as a store clerk when a hurricane swept across his island. He wrote a letter describing the hurricane damage. It was printed in a local newspaper. Several wealthy island plantation owners were impressed by Hamilton's letter. They decided to pay for Alexander to attend King's College in New York. He was a strong believer in the Patriot cause. Hamilton joined General Washington's army soon after the fighting started. In a short time, he became one of Washington's closest aides. Now, as one of New York's delegates to Congress, he too saw how weak the new government was under the Articles of Confederation. Like Madison and Hamilton, George Washington felt that the central government had to have more power. In 1787, he wrote, and of course on the bottom of the page there is a picture of the three gentlemen. He wrote this. He wrote, what did he write? He wrote to a friend on page 33. To be fearful of giving Congress enough authority for national purposes appears to me madness. What then is to be done? Things cannot go on this way forever. So he was saying that by not giving, the reason we weren't giving Congress power was because we were fearful of them having too much power. And he said, that's crazy. That's just crazy talk. And what should we do? Because it can't go on like this forever. So Washington feared that people might become so frustrated with the government that they might even start believing the country would be better off with a king. So that was his concern. He was concerned that, everybody in the colonies, they were British citizens at one time. And they did at one time like having the monarch and parliament and the king and stuff like that. And we fought this huge war and we got rid of our king. And now we've got this government. And he was worried that the people will be like, you know what? Things were much better when the king was in charge. Yeah, our government did things for us. They took care of things. They, whatever. And this central government that we have, it's not working. And he was worried that people would be like, let's have a king again. And he didn't want that. He's like, I just fought a war for this, okay? So in 1786, Madison, Hamilton, and several others persuaded Congress to call for a special convention of all the states in Philadelphia in May 1787. The invitations to the convention went out as news was spreading about Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. So they invited all these delegates, and this happened at the same time that there was this Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. And that news helped to convince the states that the convention was necessary. They decided to participate, and they selected very experienced delegates to attend. So before I continue reading, as a side note, the Shays' Rebellion, where is it? It shows, I thought it showed it in here. Anyway, Shays' Rebellion was that rebellion, I think it was it was chapter 3, at the end of chapter 3, where they had people rising up against the militias in Massachusetts. Anyway, needless to say, so lots of people send delegates because they don't want something like what happened in Massachusetts to happen in their state. The purpose of this convention, Congress said, was to recommend changes for improving the Articles of Confederation. So Congress, when they sent the invites out, they said, we want our delegates to come because we want to change the Articles of Confederation. They weren't scrapping them, they just wanted to change them and make things a little bit better. But for Hamilton and Madison, the real purpose of the convention was not to improve the Articles of Confederation, but to replace them with an entirely new constitution. So these two guys were like, you know what? Everybody else, they think they're coming, and we're just going to fix the Articles of Confederation, but let's try and get them to just replace it because this is ridiculous. Okay, so page 33, continuing on, almost at the bottom, second to last paragraph. What should the new Constitution look like? For more than a year, Madison had been pondering that question. He'd been thinking about it, okay? And that's what you need to do before you make some big, drastic changes to the government, right? He pored over books on history of ancient Greece and Rome. He studied the writings of important thinkers on government and politics. He took notes. He thought. He had a plan. Then he read still more books and took more notes and thought some more. So this wasn't just some rash, hey, let's do this and this is how it should look. No, he did research and he looked at governments that had really good stable governments that were powerful but not too powerful, and he read about them, and he read philosophies and ideas from different thinkers on politics and government, and he read more, and he took notes, and he read more, and I'm sure he had discussions. Can you imagine having dinner with him? He's probably like, okay, I read this really good book about the government of Greece, and okay, I'm just saying. That's the dinner conversation at his house for over a year, right? So it was clear to Madison that a new central government must have more power than the old one had. He had to wrestle with a big question. How do you create government with enough, 34-page power to act, but not so much power that it threatens the people's liberties? So that was that balancing act. He's like, there's got to be a way to figure that out, right? So as he studied and thought, his idea for a plan of such a government gradually began to take shape. One thing Madison had already figured out: no central government could be successful if it had to depend on the states for everything it needed, right? It had to be able to raise its own money and enlist its own soldiers. And it should not have to ask the states if they would please contribute. So in the Articles of Confederation, that's what the federal government did. If they needed money for taxes, they had to ask the states to pay for it. And the states were kind of like, nah, no, we're good. Or if they wanted to raise an army because there was some sort of battle or an uprising, as happened in Massachusetts, they had to ask the states for people to join from their armies. And sometimes the states are like, no, we don't need to. Okay. So meanwhile, on page 34 at the bottom, last article, paragraph, meanwhile, as the starting date of the Philadelphia Convention drew near, newspapers all over America were filled with stories about what they were calling the Grand Convention of the States. To us, it became known as the Constitutional Convention, okay? So that's what we call it today, the Constitutional Convention, because eventually we're going to get a constitution out of it. Page 35. Readers of those newspapers fully understood that whatever happened in Philadelphia or didn't happen, if the delegates could not agree, or didn't happen if the delegates let me rewind, start that sentence over again. Readers of those newspapers fully understood that whatever happened in Philadelphia or didn't happen if the delegates couldn't agree would have a great effect upon the future of our country. And not just their own country. One newspaper said, the Grand Convention of the States will settle forever the fate of a Republican government. What that meant was this: European governments did not expect the United States to last. So even though we became this new country and France helped us and some other countries kind of helped us beat England, many of the European countries never thought the United States would last. They were like, come on, guys. First of all, you're escaping from Britain, and they're the ones with all the money, and you guys don't have a government, and you're just some rebellious people, and they didn't think of the U.S. They're like, okay, somebody else is going to overtake you soon, really. Okay. Anyway, they believed that ordinary people could never govern themselves. Most of the European nations at that time, they all had monarchs or somebody else governing them. It wasn't the people that was governing themselves. Remember, we were a revolutionary idea of this self-government thing, right? Okay, so let's see. If the Constitutional Convention failed to create a Republican government that worked, then the European governments could say, see, we told you so. And it would be a long, long time before anyone else in the world would be willing to try a Republican government again. Now, if you look at that picture there on page 35, this is a picture of the delegates as they came together to the Pennsylvania State House, now called Independence Hall, to try to save the government of a new nation. So this is our setting, okay, where we're going to leave this with chapter 4. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison wanted to get rid of and scrap the Articles of Confederation. They wanted a stronger federal government that would work and last. But they didn't want it to be too powerful. They wanted it to have, if you will, some checks and balances. So it had power, but it couldn't take it away from the people, and the people still ultimately held the power in their hands. And if in the next chapter that we talk about next week, we'll learn more about what they created at this convention, all right? So right now, that wraps it up. So you should be able to answer all of your questions that are on your worksheet, including, where's the big question? I gotta find the page. The big question, which is, why did James Madison and Alexander Hamilton think a stronger central government was needed? So tell me why. All right, that's the last question on the worksheet for the big question, but answer all of them as well. And if you have any questions, make sure you join me Monday through Thursday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. I have my video meets hangout thing, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions that you need further explanation on when it comes to this chapter. I miss you guys, and I hope you guys are staying safe and doing well. All right, enjoy the rest of your week.